5:11 in the morning, January 28th, 2021. A file lands in Robinhood's computer systems. It's automated, the kind of message that goes out to roughly 100 brokerages every morning before the sun's up. Nobody usually reads them closely, but this one carried a number: $3 billion. That's what Robinhood had to put up in cash that day, or it couldn't keep operating. And here's the part that made the operations team start calling executives in the dark. In its entire life as a company, Robinhood had raised about $2 billion. The bill was bigger than everything they had. By the time the market opened, millions of ordinary people would wake up and find they could no longer buy a single share of one specific stock. To understand why a video game store nearly cracked the financial system, you have to know what GameStop actually was by then. A chain of stores in dying malls. You'd walk in, trade your old games for store credit, buy a used disc. For years, that worked. Then the world changed underneath it. You stopped driving to a store to buy a game. You downloaded it. The console did it for you in your living room. Then the pandemic hit, and people couldn't go to malls at all. GameStop was losing money, closing locations, and looking very much like the next Blockbuster. Wall Street noticed, and a lot of professional investors made the same bet. This company is going to zero. The way you bet against a stock is called short selling. It works backwards from how most people think about investing. Normally, you buy low and sell high. Shorting flips it. You borrow shares from someone who owns them, sell those borrowed shares today at the current price, and you promise to buy them back later and return them. If the price drops like you expect, you buy them back cheap, hand them over, and pocket the difference. You sold high and bought low, just in that order. But there's a trap built into it. When you buy a stock the normal way, the worst that can happen is it goes to zero and you lose what you put in. When you short a stock, your loss has no ceiling. The stock can keep climbing. $10, $50, $300. And every dollar up is a dollar out of your pocket, because eventually you still have to buy those shares back at whatever they cost. Now hold on to one number, because it's the strangest one in this whole story. By late January, the amount of GameStop stock that had been sold short was more than the amount of GameStop stock that existed. Over 140% of the available shares. More than all of them. That sounds impossible. We'll get to how, but sit with it, because it's the crack the whole thing fell through. In 2019, a man named Gill started buying GameStop. He worked in financial services in Massachusetts, had his analyst credentials, and on the side, he ran a YouTube channel and posted on Reddit. On YouTube, he was Roaring Kitty. On Reddit, he went by a username we'll politely shorten to Deep Value. He put roughly $50,000 into GameStop shares and options, and then he did something unusual. He showed his work. Screenshots of his actual account. Long, patient videos explaining why he thought the market had the company wrong. His argument wasn't complicated. The stock was being priced like the company was already dead. But it had cash, it had a brand, and it might have a future if the right people ran it. Then, in 2020, Cohen showed up. Cohen had built an online pet supply company called Chewy and sold it for billions. He started buying huge chunks of GameStop, eventually around 10%, and pushed to drag the company into the internet age. In January of 2021, Cohen and two of his people joined the board. To the crowd gathering on the Reddit forum called Wall Street Bets, this was the signal. A proven internet guy was now steering the ship. The stock that everyone on Wall Street had left for dead might actually live. And they noticed the same thing Gill had been pointing at for over a year. The shorts were enormous. More shares were sold short than existed. So how does that happen? It comes down to borrowing the same thing twice. Say I borrow your share and sell it short. The person who buys it from me now owns a real share. They can lend it out too. Another short seller borrows that same share and sells it again. The single piece of stock has now been borrowed and sold twice. Count up all those short positions and you can sail right past 100% of what exists. It's a paper chain, and every link is a promise to buy a share back someday. Here's why that matters. If everyone shorting is forced to buy back at once, there aren't enough shares to go around. They're all chasing the exits through the same narrow door. That's a short squeeze. The price climbs, the losses on the short bets grow, some short sellers panic and buy to cut their losses. That buying pushes the price higher, which terrifies the next group into buying too. Up feeds up. The people who bet on the collapse become the fuel for the rocket. And there was a second engine bolted onto the first. A lot of the Reddit buyers weren't just buying shares. They were buying call options, contracts that pay off if the stock rises. The banks who sold those contracts had to protect themselves, and the way they do that is by buying the actual stock. More options bought meant more stock the banks had to buy, which pushed the price up, which forced them to buy even more. That feedback loop has a name too, a gamma squeeze. Two squeezes, stacked, both pointing the same direction. It's worth slowing down on why the banks had no choice. When you sell someone a call option, you've promised to hand over stock at a set price if it climbs. If the stock rockets and you don't own any, you're the one facing the unlimited loss. So the dealers buy shares to cover themselves, and the faster the stock rises, the more they have to buy. They weren't betting on GameStop. They were trying not to drown. But their buying looked exactly like everyone else's, and it shoved the price the same direction, which shoved the short sellers closer to the cliff. Every player was acting sensibly for their own survival, and the sum of all that sensible behavior was a stock floated loose from anything resembling its real worth. Stop and look at the shape of this for a second. You've got a dying retailer, a mountain of bets that it would die, and that mountain was physically too big to unwind without buying shares that didn't exist. The professionals weren't wrong that GameStop was a weak company. They were wrong about something else. They'd left themselves no clean way out. A crowd of people who'd done the same math figured out that if they bought and simply refused to sell, the trapped short sellers would have to come to them. The squeeze wasn't a lucky accident or a mob getting carried away. It was a structural corner that the smart money had backed itself into, and the crowd just had to lean on it. Then January happened, and the numbers stopped looking like a normal stock. On the first trading day of the year, GameStop sat around $17. By January 22nd, the squeeze was on. On January 25th, a hedge fund called Citadel and another investor pumped $2.75 billion into Melvin Capital, one of the funds shorting GameStop, because Melvin was bleeding so badly it needed a transfusion to stay alive. On January 26th, Elon Musk tweeted one word, GameStonk, with a link to the Reddit forum. The stock closed near $148. The next day, January 27th, it closed around $347. In 3 days, from the 25th to the 28th, GameStop rose over 530%. At its wildest, on January 28th, it touched $483 in early trading. A stock that a serious valuation expert at New York University, Aswath Damodaran, figured was worth maybe $47 under the rosiest assumptions you could justify. The damage to the short sellers was real money. By the end of January, one data firm pegged their losses at $23.6 billion. Melvin Capital, even after that emergency cash injection, was wrecked and would shut down for good the following year. People who'd never traded a stock in their lives were watching a few $100s turn into a few thousand. The forum went from about 2 million members to over 6 million in a matter of days. Something that started as a finance argument had become a movement, and the movement believed it was winning. Then came the morning file. To see why it mattered, you need one piece of plumbing nobody thinks about. When you buy a stock, the trade doesn't finish instantly. Back then, it took 2 business days to fully settle, for the money and the shares to actually change hands. In that gap, a company called a clearinghouse stands in the middle and guarantees the trade happens even if one side blows up. The clearinghouse for U.S. stocks is the NSCC, and to cover the risk during that gap, it requires brokers to post collateral, cash, held as a safety deposit, scaled to how risky and volatile the trading is. GameStop was the most volatile stock on the planet that week, so the safety deposit the NSCC demanded from Robinhood exploded. That 5:11 a.m. file showed a deficit of about $3 billion. Most of it, over $2.2 billion, was a special premium charge layered on precisely because the trading was so wild. Robinhood didn't have it, so Robinhood made a choice that would define the entire saga. At a few minutes before market open, it switched off the buy button. You could sell your GameStop. You could not buy more. Same for a handful of other meme stocks. Think about what that does to a squeeze. The squeeze runs on buying. Cut off the buying and you cut off the fuel. The price, which had been screaming upward, stalled and started to fall. After Robinhood restricted the trading, the clearinghouse cut its demand down to around $700 million, because with no new buying, Robinhood's risk had shrunk. The rocket lost its engine the moment the crowd couldn't add to it. And here's a twist almost nobody expects. When the SEC later dug through the actual trading data, it concluded that the short squeeze wasn't even the main thing driving the price. The forced buying by trapped short sellers was real, but it was a smaller part of the story than the legend says. What kept GameStop climbing for weeks, the SEC found, was simpler and stranger. Ordinary people who believed in it and just kept buying. Not a clever trap snapping shut, a crowd that wouldn't stop. Some academics pushed back and argued the squeezes mattered more than the SEC allowed. But the regulator's own read was that the most powerful force in the whole event was belief. So now you can see the whole arc, and it's stranger than either side admitted at the time. A crowd of small investors found a genuine weakness in how the giants had positioned themselves, and they leaned on it with nothing but a refusal to sell. For a few days, it worked. The little accounts had Wall Street trapped. And then they ran into something they never thought to look at. Not the hedge funds, the wiring underneath the market itself, the boring settlement machinery that decides who's allowed to trade and when. The crowd could beat the players. What stopped them was the rules of the game, written long before any of them showed up. Picture the person on the other end of that buy button, someone who'd put $1,000 in, watched it climb, read on the forum that the way to win was to hold and keep buying, and then opened the app on January 28th to find that one option was gone. They could only sell. The single action that would let the price fall was the only action allowed. To a lot of these people, it didn't feel like a settlement rule. It felt like the casino changing the locks the moment regular people started winning. The rage was instant, and it was personal. It got dark. Vlad Tenev, Robinhood's CEO, started avoiding his own home after receiving death threats. He was 34 years old, and he spent days in a hotel. Within weeks, he was sitting in front of Congress, alongside the hedge fund managers and Keith Gill, trying to explain the unexplainable to lawmakers who didn't fully understand it either. Gill testified too. He'd turned that $50,000 bet into tens of millions on paper. And when asked to justify it, he didn't give a speech about sticking it to Wall Street. He said, plainly, "In short, I like the stock." That was the whole defense. He believed in the company. Years later, his fortune would be estimated in the hundreds of millions. The only place a real penalty ever landed was on his old employer. Massachusetts regulators fined Mass Mutual, the insurance firm Gill had worked for while posting, $4 million for failing to keep an eye on what its agents were doing online. Gill himself walked away clean and rich. What pulled millions of strangers into this wasn't really greed, or not only greed. It was belonging. For once, the people who always felt locked out of the financial world were inside it, together, moving something enormous. That feeling is powerful, and it's exactly the feeling that makes people hold a stock all the way back down to the floor. Many did. They watched the gains evaporate and held anyway, because selling felt like betraying the group. The same bond that gave the crowd its power was the thing that cost a lot of them their money. You can see it in the language they used. On the forum, selling was paper hands. Holding no matter what was diamond hands. They built a whole vocabulary that turned a financial decision into a test of loyalty. Selling didn't just mean taking your profit. It meant you were weak, a traitor. You'd abandoned the people next to you. When the price was climbing, that pressure pushed everyone to buy more, and the rocket flew. When it was falling, the same pressure told them to freeze. Some genuinely believed the real squeeze hadn't even happened yet, that the stock would reach thousands a share. It never did. But the belief held them in their seats while the value drained out, because getting up to leave felt like letting the team down. The piece worth carrying out of all this isn't about GameStop. It's about how you found out you could trade for free. Robinhood didn't charge commissions. That's why everyone loved it. But running a brokerage costs money. So the question you should always ask is who's actually paying? The answer was something called payment for order flow. When you placed a trade, Robinhood routed it to big trading firms, and those firms paid Robinhood for the privilege of handling your order. One of the largest doing that was Citadel Securities, the same Citadel that had just put billions into the hedge fund getting destroyed by the GameStop trade. People drew a straight line and cried conspiracy. Robinhood shut off buying to protect its paymasters. The regulators and the evidence pointed instead to the clearinghouse collateral call. But notice that you needed a congressional hearing to find out your free trading app had a tangle of financial ties to the very firms on the other side of your trades. That's the pattern. Not just here. Anywhere you're getting something valuable for nothing. If a product is free and slick and frictionless, the cost didn't vanish. It moved somewhere you can't see. The trade you place isn't only between you and the market. There's a chain of firms behind it, each taking a sliver, each with its own interests. And most of the time, you'll never know they exist until something breaks and you're locked out at 5 a.m. And the part that reaches all the way into today, the whole disaster traced back to that 2-day gap between making a trade and settling it. So the regulators closed the gap. In May of 2024, the U.S. market cut settlement from 2 days to 1, and the SEC said plainly it was doing it partly because of GameStop. The thing that froze the buy button got quietly rewired so it'd be harder to freeze again. The crowd lost the battle in 2021 and still managed to change the plumbing of the entire market. So here's the mental model to keep. When something costs you nothing, find out who it costs something, because that person is the real customer, and you might be the product. That's true of trading apps, and it's true of most free things online. And separate two ideas that felt identical that January. There's owning a stock, and there's belonging to a movement. They feel the same when the price is going up. They feel completely different on the way down. A stock is a claim on a business. A movement is a crowd, and crowds don't have a floor. Any trade that only works if everyone keeps buying forever isn't an investment. It's a game of musical chairs where nobody tells you the music's about to cut. That file arrived at 5:11 in the morning, before almost anyone was awake. By the time the rest of the country opened its trading apps, the most important decision of the whole episode had already been made by machinery most people didn't know existed. Robinhood survived. It raised over $1 billion from its investors in about a day to cover that bill, and more after that. The crowd thought it was fighting hedge funds. It was, for a few days. What beat it was a settlement rule and a collateral call. The giants weren't the cage. The plumbing was. If this made something click, hit like and subscribe, and tell me one thing in the comments. Have you ever held on to an investment longer than you should have just because selling felt like giving up?